Welcome to the So Why podcast with Step Care Solutions. This podcast aims to explore issues and challenges, as well as ideas and solutions leading to strengthening support for mental wellness and recovery. My name is Alexa Bull, Director of Co-Design and Knowledge Exchange at Step Care Solutions, and I will be your host for this episode. Single session therapy, sometimes called one-at-a-time therapy, has been around for some time. It has been steadily gaining attention among providers and service delivery systems. It is based on the assumption that something helpful can happen in one interaction. The thing is, single session therapy is an important approach because many people can only attend or want to attend one session. Research shows the most common number of therapy sessions attended is one session. If a person will only engage once and they may never come back for another session, it becomes really important that the one session they have is helpful. One-at-a-time therapy provides an effective option for people seeking support to address their concerns in the moment. Borrowing from this approach, one-at-a-time thinking has been identified as a core component of Step Care 2.0. This thinking considers that every encounter across the mental health system is an opportunity for a person to have a helpful experience and address their immediate concerns. Today, we are joined by Dr. Wendy Dryden, Emeritus Professor of Psychotherapeutic Studies at Goldsmiths University of London. He is a Fellow of the British Psychological Society and has authored or edited over 275 books. His current interests are in single session and very brief interventions within a therapy and coaching context. Let's welcome Dr. Wendy Dryden to the So Why podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today on the So Why podcast. We're so happy to have you with us today.
My pleasure.
So if we can just start out talking a little bit about what drew you to single session therapy.
Well, when I had given training workshops in the past, I'd always wanted to demonstrate what I was talking about by doing a real therapy session, if you like, although it's a shorter one, with a member of the audience, be it a face-to-face audience or a online audience, as it turned out later on. And so I developed over the years a way of working in that space, and I enjoyed working in that space, and I think that people found it useful. And I discovered that by really concentrating and getting down to business straight away, that you can actually utilize time effectively in therapy without doing all the things that we, therapists tend to do, prior to starting therapy. So I think that was the foundation of my interest. And as I now think of it, I've been doing single session therapy for years, if we take into account that type of work. Now, when I retired from my university position in 2014, I was looking around to find something to get my teeth into, professionally, since I wasn't ready to hang up my shingle quite yet. And so I was struck by the fact that people were talking about waiting lists and waiting time, and I went back to Moishe Talman's book, which I had previously read, I think in the early 2000s, but didn't really, well, it was interesting, but it didn't really make much of an impact on me. But so I read the same book in 2013, I think it was, and it had a remarkable impact on me, which I think only goes to shows that the book was the same, but I wasn't ready the first time for it. I was in a different space. Then I was ready. So I decided to commit myself to both the practice, the training, the supervision of single session work, rather than do my other idea, which was to set up a procrastination clinic. A friend of mine said, look, if you set up a procrastination clinic, you'll spend all your time kind of chasing people for fees because they'll be putting off paying you. And I thought that was a fairly persuasive argument at the time. So I decided to get involved in single session work.
That's amazing. I wonder if you could also share a little bit about, single session therapy is a little bit of a different approach, as you mentioned. Traditionally, people start with a bit of a preamble and that type of thing before they get into the actual conversation. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about why it might be important to challenge some of the more traditional beliefs held by therapists.
Well, it depends upon the work that you're doing, really. So if you're doing single session work, then you need to do it from what we now refer to is either a single session therapy mindset or single session thinking. And if you're doing more traditional, more conventional, ongoing work, then that mindset would certainly work for that therapeutic delivery. I find that when you're saying to people, yeah, okay, I'm not challenging your conventional ideas, but why don't you listen to this? This is a different way of delivering therapy. A lot of people can't listen to that without having their conventional ideas come to the fore and to criticize, what we're trying to do in single session therapy here. So I don't have a problem with conventional therapy mindset, but it just doesn't work within single session therapy. Whereas the opposite, I think, does. I think you can bring certain principles of the single session therapy mindset to more ongoing work. And I mean, if we have some time, I can talk about, a little bit about what I've been doing to actually make inroads into the other camp, so to speak.
I think that would be really interesting. I'm also curious if you could share a little bit about the single session therapy mindset and then how you think that that could impact sort of the more conventional style of therapy and counseling.
Yeah, I think that a number of us have written in the single session therapy community on the mindset or thinking, and I think I'm not going to go through them, but in my latest writings, I talk about 28 different principles or components of the mindset. Now, I think in a way, if we think about some of the more important components of that mindset, it is really kind of reflecting the idea that a lot of people don't share, a lot of clients don't share the therapist's idea about how long therapists therapy should last. The data that we have shows that the modal number is one, and yet in our training we don't train counselors to kind of offer therapy to that group who I think have been not well treated over the years. So if we are informed by the behavior of a lot of our clients, what they are seem to be showing us is that, look, we don't want to stick around that long. Help us with what we want help with now. And so I think that principle, it's kind of sort of, I'm going to New York in a couple of weeks, but one of my favorite restaurants that had to close down, it had the title "Eat Here Now," and so clients come in and say, "Help me now! Don't postpone it. Don't kind of do a case formulation or don't assess me as a person or don't take a case history. I need help now." And I think that's the real important. Help is available now for you should you want it. So we want to start therapy from moment one, which kind of unnerves a lot of therapists, if I'm honest with you. They kind of think, but we need to know all these things, and we say, well, actually, no, you don't. I mean, I've done now 780 demonstrations from workshops and training. I know nothing about these people when they come forward, nothing at all. I don't even ask them to do any pre-session questionnaire, which we can talk about if you want a little bit later, but so you can actually help people without knowing anything about them. The whole kind of tradition, which in Canada, I still regard Canada as the home of what I call open access enter now services, since we don't like the term walk-in services anymore. People are going in and say, look, I'm not I haven't come here for an assessment, I've come in here for help. And so I think that's the real kind of main principle of the mindset, that we can help people now. We can help them without knowing too much about them. We can help them in the ways that they want to be helped, not in the ways that we think they need to be helped. And I think if you're going to pin me down to, to three elements of the 28 component mindset, those would be the three, I think.
Really helpful. Thank you so much for breaking that down. I'm wondering what we can learn from that approach, that let's help people now. Let's hear what the issue is now. Let's address what's going on right now. I'm curious how we might take that and apply it to promoting well-being across the system, like beyond a counseling session. Is there a way or ways to use that approach throughout the system to support people with the now?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that, single session thinking has been applied in all kinds of areas. I mean, there's a wonderful little book which I like called Fierce Conversations, which is basically, the application of single session ideas to conversations that we can have in the workplace. Fierce doesn't mean nasty, it means kind of really focused in a way. And you can bring this mindset to supervision, and Pam Rycroft in Australia has written very cogently about that. You can bring that to meetings. What do we want to achieve by the end of today? What do we want to all walk away with so that we can say that this meeting was a productive meeting? So we can actually bring this mindset, because we don't know actually if we're going to have another meeting. We can predict, but who knows what's going to happen. I think that in a way that the important thing is that not only the mindset, the way I kind of look at it is that these aspects of the single session therapy mindset are like seeds which you need to plant in ground that has been prepared for the seeds. In other words, it's no good one or two people kind of acting like this. That the whole organization needs to be. You need to be kind of joining up with with this idea, really signing up to the idea. And I think that for me is in the training that I've done, and in terms of what I've seen how people have implemented this, I think the real difficulty is the wider organization, or the wider context, which needs to really be in place. Otherwise, spend a lot of ideas, a lot of time sort of trying to implement these ideas, but it's not going to last, because it's not part of the total zeitgeist. So I would say that we need to kind of think really out of the box about how we want to provide both healthcare and also how we want to get the most out of our business meetings and things like that.
I think the idea of approaching interactions with the idea that we may not have this interaction again. So, how can we make it the most meaningful interaction that we can have? That idea, I think, even based on what you're saying, can be applied in so many different ways throughout the system.
Yeah. And I think you can take it too far. I mean, I don't want to go out. I don't want to go out with a friend of mine, to have a couple of beers, and I want to hear the friend say, well, what do we want to get out of our conversation over the beer? I think I think that there's plenty of opportunities to to just hang loose and let it all hang out. But I think that there is a lot of opportunity to kind of to become more focused in our relationships with one another, but in a nice way. I mean, we know that the two major components of what we want to do at work is to kind of have an environment that really supports the person's emotional development, psychological development, and we also want to promote efficiency in the task of whatever the organization is focused on. And so you need to have those two. It's no good bringing a single session mindset to an organization where people hate one another. That just wouldn't work.
I think that's an important point, though. Like you mentioned about the sort of the fertile ground, being aware of the environment before you go into using that mindset and applying it to the different things that you're doing, being sure that there's readiness for that, because there may be some other issues to work on first.
Yeah, that's right. And this is why I say that people often ask me which clients are not suitable for single session therapy, and I say those who don't want it. And I think there are a number of people, of course, who have a view of therapy which matches the view of therapists and counselors. And they say, well, no, I'm not looking for that. I'm looking to kind of develop a more trusting relationship with my therapist over time, because I got a lot to talk about, and there's a lot I want to achieve, and I can't do this. I don't want that, and that's fine. That's perfectly fine. And nobody is actually kind of saying that we want to kind of stop offering services and offer everybody single session therapy, for God's sake. We need to be sort of mindful of how we're going to get the most out of single session thinking. And the way you get most out of it, I think, is that when people understand it, people can see the benefit of it, they want to experience it, and that those are shared within a group of people who've come together for whatever reason.
I think that's really important. And it's also good to recognize that single session is not necessarily the be all and answer all for all things, but having it as an option for people who that's what they want. They just want to have a conversation about what's happening right now and work through a problem and come away with sort of something that they feel like, okay, we've achieved something. It's not necessarily everyone who wants that approach. Some people do want the longer, maybe 10 sessions or whatever to work through something and be able to talk about it, things like that. So I think that's such an important point.
It's interesting hearing you talk about, the longer and 10 sessions. When I, next year, I will be celebrating, if that's the right word, my 50th year as a therapist. Okay. And when I first started off, brief therapy was about between 20 and 30 sessions. So as I've got older, brief therapy's got briefer. I don't think there's anything else than the correlational relationship between those two facts. But yeah, I mean yeah, people ideally should be given the kind of help that they want. The thing is, if it's available, and that's the issue, and so we often have to make a lot of compromises in life because things aren't going to be, ideally available. So, for example, there's a number of universities. I've done training of single session therapy in a lot of universities, and they tend to call it one at a time therapy. And a number of academic institutions have this idea that, which is, part of the single session therapy, is that let's make clear that, we are going to try to help this person with one session. More help is available, but the more help that's available will be another single session, and you can't access that until so 2 weeks have elapsed, and 2 weeks tends to be the kind of thinking about that. So what happens is that people don't necessarily kind of stress the importance of that 2 week and what you can do in it, that you can really reflect on what you've learned in that first session. You can really examine the takeaways, see how applicable it is, not only to the issue that you brought, but also to other issues. And then you can, put things into practice and see how things go, Now, having said that, people who have actually had that want to come back for another single session. Fine. But let's think, creatively, because a lot of counsellors think that ongoing therapy is once a week, right? Well, I don't know, where we got that idea from. We could easily say ongoing therapy was, once every 2.5 weeks. We know that in the good old days of psychoanalysis, ongoing therapy was 4 times a week. So you can actually have, if you put it in the right frame, some people who want more ongoing therapy can have it, but they will have to adjust to the idea that they can't book the session until 2 weeks have elapsed. So they can have a more ongoing type of help which is punctuated by a gap of about 2.5 to 3 weeks. But, it does take widening your frame, both as a counsellor and a client, to think of it like that, because a lot of counsellors say, no, ongoing therapy is once a week, and we've booked this is your time for the next God knows how many weeks, months, or even years. Now, we don't hold with that, but I think, we need to be creative. If we can't offer people a range of different therapy deliveries options after they've had their single session, then we need to be creative about what we can offer them and how best to frame that offer.
So shifting gears a little bit, one of the guiding principles of Step Care 2.0 is that professionals do not hold all the wisdom. People often know what is best for them. So from your perspective, what is the difference between sharing expertise and being the expert?
Well, I mean, again, one of my mentors, let me give you maybe an illustration. One of my mentors who who I've learned a tremendous amount from, who's sadly no longer with us, is a man called Albert Ellis, regarded now as one of the grandfathers of cognitive behavior therapy, along with, Aaron Beck. So I'll give you two versions of Albert Ellis, right? The real version and the second version. So, you would ask Albert a question in a workshop, right? Now, Albert version 1.0, if I can use that, first version of Albert, he would say, well, that's an interesting question. I think there are different ways of looking at that, and a kind of different approaches to it. But let me give you my take on this. It may not be, the right one, but it's the one that I hold, and you need to understand that there are other ways of thinking about it, but this is my way. Albert 2.0, the second version of Albert, you'd ask him a question, he would say, and the answer is ... right? No, I think that kind of sums up about, one is really offering it and saying, are you interested in, and I often say to people, are you interested in my take on, what you've been talking about and what you might be able to do with it? Now, I tend to do that when, and it's particularly about with some issues of anxiety, when people are kind of bringing to the table things that they've tried and they've not really been helpful, and they don't know what else to try, and we've got their strengths. They really, there's nothing in those strengths that, the strengths that they have, they can use, so allied to the to the knowledge which they don't have, and which I'm going to offer to them, should they be interested. So I think, there is, I would say that would be the difference. An expert says, this is the way, and somebody that's sharing expertise that says, this is one way, if you're interested in it, I'm happy to share it with you.
I like that. I think it demonstrates a little bit of humility in offering to share some knowledge, experience, or wisdom, but not necessarily imposing it as right.
Yeah, and I think that in a way that, and I've written about this, I think that the single session therapy community are so phobic about not being the expert that they've maybe not shared their expertise as much as they could. They've gone the other way, But if I'm working with a client who just doesn't know how to deal with anxiety, and I got some ideas, then it's a fusion. Again, this is something written about. Single session therapy is a fusion between the strengths and knowledge and experience of both people.
I like that. It's really collaborative.
Yeah.
All right. So in your view, what are the most important components or key ingredients of a single session therapy mindset? You mentioned a couple, but just wondering, if we were to carry this into any situation, like what are the most important things to keep in mind?
Well, as I say, just kind of review the ones that I've actually kind of talked about, which is, help the person now start start therapy, sort of immediately. I think others would be, encourage the person to bring to the therapeutic space their strengths, their previous experiences of solving the same problem, which they may have actually not actually realized. And I've had that a number of times when I've said, have you had this experience before? And you've actually been able to deal with it. And so I call this introducing the client to a former part of themselves that can actually be helpful to them now. So I think that is, to look at their strengths, look at their previous experiences. For some people and for some issues, it's really important that they draw upon their environmental resources, mainly other people. And so I think that's an important aspect of things. What else? I'd say the idea that to encourage people to see, if you encourage a person to take away something that they haven't tried before and they think that that could be helpful to them, I think you're doing two things. You're one, helping them to kind of address the problem in a different way, and that you're also helping them to see more generally that they can help themselves. So one's a specific aspect and one is a more general aspect. And I like the idea that Jerome Frank said many years ago, that, or my take on that anyway, that one of our jobs is to help people who come to therapy in a state of demoralization to actually help them to restore their morale. And you do that not only by helping them specifically to say you can do this to solve this problem, but in doing so that you can remind yourself that you are a person who can solve problems. And I think that double-barreled approach, I think, is really important. So again, I'm sure I've missed lots of important things about mindset, but I wanted to come to this podcast, Alexa, with clear mind. I didn't want to come prepared, so that that I can actually stress what I deem to be important in response to your questions.
Yeah, no, I love the idea of not coming prepared to something, not overthinking something in advance, so that things can happen naturally and conversation can evolve and build naturally. And I think that in and of itself reflects the single session thinking, single session therapy.
Yeah, although I think it's useful for clients to come prepared, to that end. I do encourage people to see if you can, once a person's made an appointment, even when they just come in to an open access center, they're not going to be seen immediately. So give them an opportunity to think about what they want to come take away from this session, But so I think that's important. There are some single session therapists who actually don't want to see those forms because they want to come into the therapy session with what a famous analyst called Bion, Bion. He's talking about being able to come into therapy sessions without memory or desire. Now, I can go along with the memory bit because I think fine, you don't need to, you can actually help people where they are now. I don't think you need, I don't understand why you would come without desire, because presumably you have a desire to help somebody. But other than that, I think what he's saying is that don't over prepare. Don't think that in last session I did this and therefore in this session I will be doing that before because you're not being present. And I think that is really important. It's the presence of the therapist, which is, it's the presence of the therapist, which is a present to the client in the present moment. How's that?
That's beautiful.
Just made that one up.
That's so beautiful.
Lovely to talk to you.
You too. Thank you so much for joining us today, and hopefully we will connect again soon.
Okay.
Thank you once again for joining us on the So Why podcast with Step Care Solutions. For more information on the Step Care 2.0 model, as well as links to resources mentioned in this episode, please check out the show notes below. Thanks for tuning in once again. We look forward to having you back next time.